Turning back to our coverage of the Democratic presidential primary, CBS News projects that Joe Biden is the winner in Michigan.
That's right. This comes after Senator Bernie Sanders won the state back in 2016. Mikenzie Frost is a reporter for our Kalamazoo affiliate, WWMT, and she's joining us now from Lansing to talk more about the results from the state. Good to see you. A little bit of a delay, right? Good to see you, Mikenzie. Yeah. So let me ask you, Sanders won Michigan in 2016, but Biden pulled through with a victory last night. What has changed in the past 4 years?
Yeah. I think a lot has changed. You know, I think voters are ready. We're seeing a lot of these voters who voted for Senator Bernie Sanders back in 2016. It was really more or less a vote against Hillary Clinton. And now they're seeing a candidate that they believe could really beat Donald Trump. And some of the voters that we're seeing, we know the exit polls show that health care is one of the top issues for them. But second is, of course, beating Donald Trump for them. And they believe that Joe Biden really is the candidate that could do that. They were unsure about Senator Bernie Sanders. And I think that's where we're seeing some of those results.
So just to break down some of those results, in 2016, Sanders won union households. He won households with incomes between 50 and 100,000. He won white voters. This time around, Biden won all of those and kept kind of the coalition they already had before with African Americans and older voters. Why do you think this occurred?
You know, I think it's interesting. I think it all goes back to, again, the more or less the idea of just beating President Donald Trump. I think some of these voters that got behind Bernie Sanders, again, it was more or less about voting against the other candidate that was on the ballot. And we know Joe Biden has been a strong force here in Michigan. The Governor Gretchen Whitmer, endorsing Joe Biden. And a lot of that momentum after the endorsement, it was, well, remember, President Barack Obama and VP Joe Biden were here for Michigan during the auto bailout. And of course, that is massive here for the state, for the people, especially in Metro Detroit. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of that support go behind him.
As you know, Mikenzie, CBS News exit polls show that 84% of voters said they want a candidate that can unite the country. Those individuals voted for Biden. What do you make of results? I mean, you've got 66% black voters, 66% of moderates, and a candidate who can unite the country, 84%, overwhelming numbers.
Wow. Yeah, it's very overwhelming. And I think, you know, it really shows that President Donald Trump has some work to do here in Michigan, because when we get ready for the general election, going behind a candidate that can unite the country, that's going to bring in a lot of some of the moderate Republicans that may or may not be planning to vote for President Trump. So I think it's really going to set up a very fierce battle here in Michigan. We know that it's going to be important, but I think last night's votes really indicate that Michigan will be more or less one of the most important states for both candidates heading into November.
So if you put beating Donald Trump aside, when CBS News asked voters about the issues that they cared about the most, health care was sort of right at the top, way ahead of all of the other issues, at least in Michigan. And I guess it's, you know, then here we are in the middle of a coronavirus crisis on top of that. But why do you suppose Michigan voters are so concerned about health care?
Speaking of coronavirus, we now have it here last night. But I think it goes back to, you know, the Medicaid expansion here in Michigan is big. We're in the midst of a fight in court right now for work requirements. Last week, a week and a half ago, a federal judge decided that Michigan's federal work requirements were unconstitutional. So I think a lot of people are concerned about their health care. They want to know if they go to the doctor, where they'll be able to go. Will they be able to keep their current provider if they like it? And I think that is something that, going through talking to some of the voters, that was their biggest concern about voting for Bernie Sanders, was the Medicare for All plan getting kicked off their current plan. So I think people here in Michigan want to know if they are able to keep it, and making sure that their current health plan, especially for union voters, when that is such a big part of the bargaining negotiations when they work with their unions in the auto industry as well.
When you were there at the polls last night, Mikenzie, what did voters tell you, just in your own reporting, just or anecdotal, when you were talking to those folks that were waiting to cast their ballots? What sort of distinctions did they draw between former Vice President Biden and Senator Sanders?
You know, I wasn't at the polls last night, but I was talking to some people who were and listening to what they were saying, and I've been covering it for some time. And I think it all comes back to the fundamental change that Bernie Sanders is proposing versus the plan that Joe Biden wants to continue with, was just keeping the momentum forward, uniting the country. And that is really the progressive movement versus what we're used to seeing. And I think that's where the line is drawn with voters here in Michigan. We've seen that before in the gubernatorial primary with some of the more progressive candidates versus the more moderate candidates. And I think the same thing is the case here for presidential primary candidates. The voters are saying they want to know who can bring the country together. And they believe that Bernie Sanders, some of the ideas they can get behind, but they don't know if he's the right person to bring everyone together, since some of his ideas are so far to the left of the spectrum right now.
All right, Mikenzie Frost for us. Mikenzie, thank you very much.